You know what bothers me the most? Info dumping, info dumping, info dumping. Info dumping to this extent is really not good, okay? Really, 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 really not good. And today we have a story from Lars. Well, I mean that's the name of the author, the writer. In Gmail, they sent me this piece of art, this piece of magnificent storytelling in order to actually critique. And I have read it last night, and I am going to record a video today to tell you that I really, really, really don't like info dumping. And you can guess, you can tell that this chapter uses info dumping badly, right? Another thing that I have noticed is that it has stagnant prose. I'm going to explain what that is. Anyway, let the long rest. This is the prologue to story, The Long Rest. Every dream hides the story of your fondest memory. This is not bad. It doesn't set up significant, story information, but it is very good in the sense that it could establish theme, right? Because again, I love when authors focus on the themes, the human struggles, the human conflicts, and I love this starting sentence. Anyway, I will call her Iron from now onwards. Okay, Iron thinks back to her mother's theater. Her legs are crossed over the floor, and as usual, her body is crammed between her friend's shoulders, Servia and Carneal, while the other friends had to sit back in a row. Iron's eyes remain closed as she continues to think back to her happiest birthday with a smile. Now, this is not bad. This is actually rather interesting because this is a prologue. It's supposed to be some sort of a story that takes place in the past. Oftentimes, that's how they do it. And it promises something. By the end, it promises something. Like, for example, we have The Wheel of Time, one of my favorite prologues. You have the Dragon Reborn, which has gone crazy, and by the end of the chapter, he commits suicide. Exactly. And there's this Forsaken that really drives him, that restores his sanity, and he realizes he killed his whole family, and now this guy commits suicide. And when he commits suicide, he ends up doing it because he had killed his whole family. And so we have the Dragon Reborn, and then boom, soon after we meet, of course, Randall Thor. Well, that means there is this promise, this implied, this little boring farmer boy is going to become an epic dragon reborn, right? So I like when, because that is how typically prologues are used. So far, so good. Behind her sit two boys who keep tapping her back repeatedly. She presses her red elbows further into her legs to get caught up more into her mother's story. And so this is the memory. We are straight into the memory. At last, the kingdom of Xandria put their focus on conquering the last elven folk. Misty fields were many times smaller in size, but had control over their most powerful resource. This is where it goes downhill. So we enter the recall, the memory, right? The happy memory with a smile, and boom, we are presented with this. This is not good. This is really not good. And it keeps going. Her mother clenches her fist at the young audience, and suddenly sprinkles of purple powder descend slowly on their faces. Energy, well, written in a fancy way. Anyway, Iron tries her best not to sneeze immediately, hearing Hilda's rub, has a snotty nose behind her. So it continues. The misty elves call it the gift from the gods with which they acquire their knowledge of the world to radiate their power and enlightenment, but to conquer and destroy also. Now, this is really, it's up to you, but if I had to decide, this is really not good. This I don't care about as a reader because I don't know this story. So far, I only care about this girl, this girl, Arion, right? I only really care about Arion, who draws strength from, thinking back to her past. So I care about this girl. I don't care about the misty elves, or sorry, the misty fields, and the kingdom of Xandria, and the backstory of the world. This stuff typically has to be pushed back, because unless you really are writing epic fantasy, of which I haven't been told that this is epic fantasy, this is not a good idea. Even if it is, maybe start the story focusing a lot more on what the memory has meant to her. What does the memory mean to her? You know, focus on that character stuff. Because in the first chapter, you hook us with the character. I think you should just stick further with it, because that is a thread line you have already established that the people care about. But transitioning from that, you know, hook into this, meaning you hooked us and then you threw away your hook. It's like you had a lightsaber and you picked a tiny stupid knife that's blunt, that can't cut anything, right? This sentence cannot cut anything. This cannot cut anything. Destroy, Servia whispers. Arion slides his, her warm hand between Servia's trembling fingers. Servia must behave according to her age. After all, they are already halfway to adulthood. So, for their last attempt to conquer the small empire, Xandria paid the heaviest price. It was just after sunrise when the war horn was blown. But war ended when the gray lake mirrored the moon. I really don't even care about this. I only care about this girl, man. So far, because you have hooked with this girl and her close family and so on and so forth. I only care about them. But I am presented with so many paragraphs of, sudden, unnecessary, detracting, info dumping, right? Then she points to the window above, the fireplace. Clouds of smoke rise from the chimney. Don't get distracted, suddenly her mother chuckles. We can actually speed up. Her mother, crouches on stage. In nightly darkness, before the first summer sun rose, King Xiverion smuggled his mages into, basically I call this guy King Xi. King Xi instead of Arion, Iron. I don't know. Maybe you do this as well. Every time I read a fantasy book, I never in my head call the characters by what they are called. I am always using different names. Smuggled his mages to green gardens. She jumps up fiercely so that, there he told them to fight until the vermin are driven out. So it keeps going as all the mages stood in line. Any near inhabitant fled when seeing the shimmers in the fog. What I was thinking when I read this for the first time is that she recalls this memory, right? She continues back to her happiest birthday simply because there is a tragedy, which there is, yes, but let's be very frank. It is disconnected by pages and pages of this info dumping. And this is how an info dump can ruin, a prologue that is supposed to actually entice the audience into the story and give them a promise of, the character work, the plot, and so on and so forth. The best time to do world building is after you have hooked the audience very well into your character, into your world. Another problem with this story also, the horn blows. It keeps going, by the way. All mages stood at the frontier. The battle of green gardens. Ouch. Someone jumps in Arion's back. Tell us more. Behave yourself, right? Did the tremors actually reach Naiselu? Anyway, my mother already lived here. She felt the tremor as a child. She has never been able to forget the war because of that earthquake, even with that many wars in her lifetime. We are among the lucky few who never experienced war of mages, and your kids will even grow up in an era of peace. So this dialogue at that moment is the only person who remains on her mother's shiny gaze. She feels entangled in a staring contest. Such contests feel as exciting as the stories that told in the infinite years. So just to speed things up, right? Her mother suddenly coughs. That means Arion won, fair and square. Father claps his hands, right? We have come, by the way, very far into the chapter, and there hasn't been much of any tragedy. Aren't you tired after today? Her mother asks. There is still plenty of time to sleep. Why does Dad have to sleep already? Tomorrow, he'll be on his way, and I am not allowed to join. The dialogue. You are too young to travel, and so on and so forth. But you made a promise, didn't you? And we keep going and going and going. I think about it, but if you join, then you should already be in bed by now. This girl wants her father to take her on a trip. And that trip, that conversation, they go outside, she goes outside with her mother, and that conversation keeps going, as you can see here. She tries to convince her mother, away from her father. No, you misunderstood. Your father promised to take you when you're old enough. I'm already old enough, etc., etc. So, and ultimately she goes to sleep, and she asks her mother, a final question. Mom, did Grandma really feel the tremor? Well, I never know whether to believe her story, she admits. How so? Why would Grandma lie about something like that? And she puts, a hand over Arion's face. Such memories make for the best stories. Now, this is the entire prologue. We are back to here. You know how to fix this? When we go back to the story, instead of using dialogue, you could maybe have one dialogue sentence that expresses the story. But following that, it is best to actually just recap it quickly in one paragraph as to what it was, and then jump all the way to the end of the entire telling of the story. That way you can recap everything instead of having to spend we are among the lucky few who never experienced the War of Mages. For all of this, right? So all of this, you see how much that is? That is a lot. That is insanely a lot. That is huge to think about it. Now, you can recap all of that, right? You can recap all of it, right? You can see, you can recap beyond this first paragraph. Just recap all of that into one paragraph, and then you can then have this thing about the trip. Exactly, and you can easily conclude and save a lot of pages, and you can use those pages more efficiently. Another problem you run into when reading this is that you can quickly realize that the prose is very stagnant. The author is actually oftentimes using similar repeated sentence structures, right? For example, in the first paragraph, you have, this is a one sentence mid small, and then you have another sentence with a clause mid-range, and then you have this sentence, right, which is much larger, right, and it is much more diverse, right, and then you finally have this short one, and then you have this this mid-sized one. So the sentence structure doesn't bother me. I think the sentence structure, the author does a very good job, because you see, when you write the prose, in my opinion, what you should be doing is you need to vary the sentence lengths, so that if you want to have a short, a fast-paced scene, you need to shorten the sentence lengths in order to speed up the story. But to slow it down, you need to have longer sentences, right? You can see this, by the way, even when her mother, her mother suddenly, here, down here, for example, Arion is reluctantly dependent on his choice. Millgate should be a place filled with. So basically, this is another from short to large, which is good. And here which is this, you could say, large, between large and medium and large, and then you have this medium one, and then you have this this one also, which is kind of large, and then finally you have this one, which is precise, much shorter, until recently, yes, this is much larger. And then she concludes with this. Lars concludes with this, right? So again, the sentence length is not the problem. It's just the prose. The prose is stagnant. It's not tiring to read this. It's very nice, but the prose is very boring. To draw strength from her past, right? You know, Aryan tries her best to sneeze immediately. You know, you can keep reading the prose. You know, Aryan slides her warm hand between these trembling fingers. Servia must behave according to age. After all, they're already halfway. So the story is supposed to be fantastic with the war of mages and everything, but you also have this very bland, very boring, down-to-earth prose. And so I think there is a mismatch between the tone and the story. There's a mismatch between you know, the prose and the voice of the prose and the voice of the writer and the story. Exactly. Suddenly her father chuckles. I don't think this is necessary, but her mother crouches on stage. Aryan is shocked, she falls. So again, the prose is the word choice, the way it's structured, the voice, they don't match the story. So this is the extent of the problems with this. And finally, you have one issue, which is by the time we finish the chapter, there actually hasn't been a story. There has not been a story. I want to make that argument. We haven't seen a story by the time this prologue finishes. Zero. None. We haven't seen any story by the time this prologue finishes. And this is the end of the prologue. It is somewhat okay. You know, I've read a lot of first chapters where the authors cannot really put together a coherent sentence. That is something good. You know, the writer here can actually put together a coherent sentence, but most everything else is really not good. The info dumping is very bad. The prose is not good. And for the most part, there isn't an actual story here. We don't really get to have, for the most part, an actual story. If a prologue is supposed to set up, like I said in the beginning, this one doesn't really set up much of anything. I'm not even sure what the promise is supposed to be. Because when you start the story, you have to make a promise. Or, when you refer it in another in another way, is the premise. And the expectation that the reader has after the inciting incident, right? Anyhow, so that is where I'm going to leave it here. This is the author's name, by the way, L.A. Fintelman, right? So I think the L stands for Lars. Lars Fintelman. Anyway, fun read, great chapter. Thank you for sending this. I hope that I have helped you improve it. Have a nice day. Bye bye.